I'm going to be handing the microphone over to Mrs. Doris Allen, who is a member of the church and one of the leaders of the Black Caucus, and has also been part of the Racial Inclusion Committee, and she'll give a formal introduction to our speaker today. I'm more of just like, I just like to brag about my friend. I love Mark, he's good. Hey, and look what I brought today. His book, Integrating the Inner City. And so I only have one copy. And, give me a good price. But it'll come. No. Anyway, but I do call this to attention. I mean, Dr. Joseph is a brilliant academic, just a good man. And I have endless reserves of respect and love. And I'm so grateful that I met you. I think it was our mutual friend, Mark Chuck, that brought us together here. It was a wonderful family. Milani and Malik and Layla and Ayande, and Malik is a confirmed member of this church. So Malik, are you here? Yes. Oh, he was. He was talking to Deanne and to other people in the congregation. So if he comes in, we'll call attention to that. I heard, I don't know if it's the same presentation, but I heard Mark give a presentation last November, I believe. What was the name of the organization? I'm always forgetting.
Cleveland Neighborhood Progress.
Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. There's Malik. Hi, Malik. I just was bragging about you as a confirmed member for you. Anyway, but I heard Mark give this presentation to a packed house, and it was so thrilling and engaging and hopeful, and it was like, yeah, even me. On this journey of understanding what it means to be, one among many, and creating a community of inclusion and equity, and just witnessing the beloved community. And sometimes it gets hard. And hearing your talk that day gave me hope. And since then, I'm just like fired up. And so I want that to be your experience. I hope it is your experience. I suspect that it will be your experience. So with that, let me just give a brief prayer, and then I'll hand it over to Doris for the formal introduction, and we'll go on. Gracious God, thank you for the community here. Thank you that we're jam-packed in here, because this is important words. I believe it is inspired words from your Holy Spirit. And so, be with us and guide us in our listening and our engagement. And Lord, may we be changed. In Jesus' name I pray. Send your power upon Mark, our speaker, that he may inspire us this day. Amen. And now let's give it up for Doris Allen, who will introduce us. I can really speak right into it.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am Doris Allen,
Speak into it.
a member of Forest Hill Church and a member of the Black Caucus. It is my honor on behalf of Session, the Racial Inclusion Committee, and the Black Caucus to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Mark Joseph. Dr. Joseph, along with his wife, Milani, his daughter, Layla, his son, Ayande, and the son who is a member of our church, Malik, is a frequent visitor at Forest Hill Church. Dr. Joseph is a Leona Bevis and Marguerite Haynam Associate Professor of Community Development at the Mandel School of Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. He is also the founding director of the National Initiative on Mixed Income Communities. Dr. Joseph received his PhD from Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. Dr. Joseph was a postdoctoral scholar at the School of Social Service Administration at the University of Chicago, and a Harlech Visiting Scholar at Oxford University. His undergraduate degree is in government from Harvard University. Dr. Joseph's research has focused on mixed income development, on a strategy for addressing urban poverty. He is the co-author of the award-winning book, Integrating the Inner City, The Promise and Perils of Mixed-Income Public Housing Transformation. I have been blessed to sit down and talk with Dr. Joseph about a myriad of issues. Foremost among them is our shared vision of dismantling racism. Mark shared with me a poignant moment when he was visiting Ghana slave ports. He recounted that he was struck by the incongruity of churches being above the holding pens of captured Africans about to be sent to the Western Hemisphere to be deemed chattel. Churches and religions, Mark observed, are no less flawed than other institutions. I am a member of Forest Hill Church and Mark a frequent visitor because we both recognize that flawed as we are, Forest Hill Church intentionally wrestles with our flaws and strives to be better today than it was yesterday. Mark is here today because of that shared vision and commitment. It is with my deepest honor that I present to you Dr. Mark Joseph.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. And Ms. Allen, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. Really appreciated that. And thank you to the members of the Black Caucus who took time a week and a half ago to sit with me, really educate me, inform me about the journey that they have been on and the church has been on and their perspective on that. Really was helpful in preparing for this discussion, which I do hope will be a discussion. I have a lot to say, but I'm going to try and get through it quickly so we can open up and have some conversation together. I also want to thank the Racial Inclusion Committee for co-sponsoring the event, and my good friend, old friend, Ron Register. Ron and I go back to 1992 or 3, when Ron was still living in Memphis. We shared a very special evening together. It was my first trip to Memphis, and Ron actually stayed later after our meetings to take me by the Lorraine Motel. And we shared a really powerful evening then, so I've known Ron a long time. But Ron also took some time to sit with me a couple weeks ago and give me some of the history again of the journey that the church has been on. So thank you, Ron, and thank you, Racial Inclusion Committee. John Lentz, you're my brother. What more can I say? Just enjoying the walk together, and thank you for nudging and encouraging me to bring some of these thoughts in and share them with the church. And I do feel like the time is right, given the moment where things are at this time. I also want to reference, where's my friend Quentin, said he was going to go in the back. My new friend, Quentin Smith, but someone else who took extra time with me to sit down and talk a little bit about what's been going on in the church and share some perspective. So that I really wanted to make sure that whatever I shared would be of value to the path that you all are on. And it's been years worth. So we love Forest Hill Church. I don't think there's a more direct way to say it. We've been attending the church ever since we moved to Cleveland, which was 2006. And so soon after that, Mark Chupp, who is my literal next door office neighbor at the Mandel School, and he and I joined Case Western at the very same time, literally same week. And I had met him previously with some of the work I had been doing in Cleveland. So we'd already struck up a friendship, and he said, you know, I've got this pretty cool church that I'd like you to check out. And we came very early, one of our first Sundays, and have really enjoyed having this be one of the church homes in Cleveland that we frequent. Mark couldn't be here today, but I'm glad this will actually be taped so that he will get to hear that I gave him a little shout out. The church has been so good to us, to me, to my family, and if you've heard, it was important enough for Malik, who came here when he was just 6 years old, that when it came time for confirmation, he was very clear that he wanted to be confirmed here. And I was just talking with Peg about that group that she was also a part of. That was a cool group of confirmands that year. So thank you all for what you've done for Malik. He wears his badge proudly, as you can see. Gets up and throws it on. So very, very proud member here. So I really do hope we can get into some discussion, but I'll share a few thoughts to get you started. And these are thoughts that I have developed for my work in community development, neighborhood development, urban poverty, but in preparing to have this discussion in a faith institution, it really kind of landed in a special way. So I'm actually extremely excited to try this out here and see how it resonates and see if it would be of value to you. So I try to be, as John knows, very action-oriented. I think when folks hear that they're coming to talk with an academician, a scholar or a professor or whatever, they feel like it's going to sit all up here. And we'll do a little bit of stuff up here, but the whole goal today is for each and every person in the room. And I literally mean that. My hope is that this touches each and every one of you and is useful in some way. Walks away with something useful. And so for that reason, I boiled it down. There are just 2 tools that I would like to share with you. And this is good because I wanted to remember to introduce a special guest. My mother-in-law, Vera, is with us, Vera Labat. Yeah, good job. She's visiting from California, so she came in for, Malik graduated from high school last week, so she's in for the graduation and loves her son-in-law so much that she's extended her stay so we can hang out. But Vera asked me last night, she said, what would be your goal? What's your objective for the conversation tomorrow? And I said, you know, if I can share something that folks walk away chewing on a little bit, that kind of equips them as they get into the weeks and months and years ahead. If there's something here that they can walk away with, that would be a success for me. So, without further ado, what are those 2 goals? One is a racial equity lens, and that's probably a term you've heard, some of you may be familiar with. When I went looking for one, I'd heard this term, apply a racial equity lens, use a racial equity lens. So I went looking for one, I still haven't been able to find one anywhere. So I think it exists more in concept of a lens, so I built one. So I'm going to share with you my emerging racial equity lens. If it works for you, use it. If you want to twist it a little bit, use it. If you want to throw it out and build another one, do it. But I think this notion of applying a racial equity lens is very important. The other notion is the notion of racial equity vigilance. Racial equity vigilance. How do we make sure that on an everyday, every moment basis, we are being active around racial equity? Racial equity is not something that we can check in on once a month, every now and then. I really believe this notion of vigilance is going to be critical to making a difference. For myself, and I share them with you, I created these 2 mnemonics. I had recently come back from, I think, my 3rd visit to Ghana. Many of you know I grew up over in Africa as a child, so Africa is a really important part of my identity, who I am. But I've been thinking more and more about Adinkra symbols. And I thought, you know what, this might be a good way to kind of nail it in my own brain and maybe share it with others, something different that you see. So then as you think about, what was it Mark was talking about again? These Adinkra symbols. So the one on the right, actually I'll come back to that in 1 second. So you see here, back to Mark Chubb, this is our trip. We took our first course to Ghana about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. We were in Ghana for 3 weeks in May of 2017. And you can see some of the Adinkra symbols here, and you can see Mark there. And we actually made this banner. Each of us got to pick one symbol and put it on the banner. So that's going to be up in the Mandel School. So here are the 2 symbols. There actually is an Adinkra symbol for vigilance. And it's the war horn. This is meant to represent a war horn of the Ashanti people. Akoben is the title. And then there isn't a symbol for lens, but I found Nyansapo, which is a symbol for wisdom and intelligence. And the phrase that goes with it is, a person can find the right way to do something. A person can find the right way to do something. And I thought, yes, that's what a lens does for you. It helps you find the right way to do something. So those are the 2. So you'll see those pop up. As I put the talk together last November, and I've shared it with a variety of audiences, my goal was like, how do we really get to racial equity and inclusion? Like, what if we were not just talking about it, not just hoping for it, not just praying for it, but actively figuring out what would it take to get there? And I thought there were kind of 3 paths I could think of. One I would call the status quo. This is the path that we're on right now. And we just kind of zig and zag. We have moments of progress, and then we fall back. And then we make some more progress, and then we fall back. maybe we're getting somewhere, but if you're like me, and you hear a stat like our schools today are more segregated than they were 50 years ago, then you wonder, is this zigging and zagging really going to get us where we need to be anytime soon? So I'm not so sure about the incremental path, but it's the one that we're on. And certainly as we look at our country today, we feel like, man, things are being wound back. We're losing ground. So the other path that some of us will often say is, you know what, it's going to take a revolution. They're just going to push folks so far that at some point, it's just going to build up and crash over us. And certainly we have examples in history of social revolutions, social movements. This is a path. To me, and it can be a persuasive path, it can be a forceful one. It's high intensity. It requires a critical mass. You got to build up, build up. What will that critical mass be? Here's my issue with it. It can be fleeting. That you can have that moment, you can have that change, and then slowly it gets wound back. Think again of the fact that schools are more segregated today, right? We had such a victory decades ago. So I want to propose a third path. And the third path I would propose is what I call awareness to vigilance. And it's a campaign, it's intentional, it's thoughtful, it's planned. The way I think about it is it's deep, but it's durable. We got to build whatever we do so that it stands the test of time. We take one step, we don't slide back. We put the next step on top of that one. And I think we've got this new kind of social technology notion now of things going viral. We didn't have that available to us 5 years ago, maybe, certainly 10 years ago. If I said something went viral, you would think, oh, a medical situation, right? But now when we hear about things going viral, one person can do something and it can catch the public fancy and go viral. How do we use that social technology to make this change go exponential? And so my notion, the visual, is that you throw a few pebbles and you get those rings of change moving. And those rings beget other rings, beget other rings. And so we think of a more viral, and we probably could tell the story in Forest Hill about how one incident, perhaps, at least that's the way I understand the narrative, set a whole range of activities in place. And now you have a bunch of activities. And for those who don't know the church, and I have some dear friends, Carmel and Vicky, who are visiting Forest Hill for the first time today, roped in by Lisa Vehe. You gotta come. Make sure Mark's not all alone in the room. So Carmel and Vicky, we have been in the trenches. Our favorite summer, we knocked on 1,000 doors in the Moreland neighborhood to make sure that the families in the Moreland neighborhood knew about the Shaker Heights strategic plan that was going on. And so we had and we had board members out there and superintendent out there, so that was a fabulous summer a few years ago. So you may not be aware of how many layers of work there are going on in the church already, and committees and work groups. There's a lot going on. So you all understand this planting seeds notion very well already. I'm preaching to the choir. Truly preaching, like literally preaching to the choir. Here's a quote that I really like that I found as I was doing some research in preparation for the original talk. Dr. Nazir, who works with Living Cities, it's a national community development association, she says, even as we're attacking big, seemingly intractable problems, structural racism and poverty, change begins with checking our personal biases. Understanding how we, and by we I think she literally means not the royal we, each one of us, contribute to racial inequities and inclusion, and then we hold our partners to doing the same. She said it requires members of collective initiatives to create space to stay in open dialogue, to learn, understand, and grow. As each individual builds his or her muscle for greater awareness, change behavior, the cross-sector table of partners becomes stronger collectively and better able to influence systems and their leaders. Let me just highlight a few key terms here. I hope these resonate with you here at Forest Hill Church. Here's the whole point. Stay in open dialogue, learn, understand, grow, but this is an individual. This has got to start with each individual. And it's about muscle. John mentioned it earlier. This is about building individual muscle. So each of you should be thinking right now, what are you saying? What muscle do I need to build to be a part of this racial equity? Some of you know, and your muscles are worn, or they're huge, or you've been working on them. Others are like, I never thought about that before. Right? So that's what I think we want to start chewing on together. Changed behavior. We cannot continue to act the way we act now. And that's all of us. Black folks and white folks. There are many points in this talk where my fellow black community, and I'm often in a part of that, would say, okay, yes, I'm glad you're saying that to the white people. I'm glad they're hearing that from you. They might hear it from you in a way they wouldn't hear from me. But I'm also speaking to the black people. And I'm speaking to myself, honestly. I do not have this stuff figured out. Quite humbly, I'm on the journey too. So a lot of this is a reminder to myself. We have to change our behavior, then we become stronger collectively. The final part of her quote, the domino effect. So what does that domino effect make you think of? My viral campaign. It's a domino effect. Will ultimately bolster our ability to dismantle structural racism and lay a new, equitable, and inclusive foundation upon which our systems can exist. So it's individual to collective, and it requires awareness, muscle, change behavior. All right, so I packed that into a theory of change. I'm going to give you 2 theories of change. Allow me to throw a little academic-y term out there, but all it means is, how do we get from here to there? How do we get from here to there? And often we use a theory of change to force ourselves to lay out, how do we think this is going to play out? Name the domino effect for me. So here's 4 dominoes I'm going to show you. Big dominoes at an individual level, and then I'll show you a collective level. So at the individual level, it starts with awareness. It starts with being aware. And it's often shocking to many of us in the black community, as we now, in many of our workplaces and faith institutions and schools and wherever, are getting into really well-meaning conversations around racial equity. It's shocking to find out how many people are not aware. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. I didn't know that about our history, about our laws, about how we got here today. Including us. There's so much I am still learning about why things are the way they are today. So the first step is just being aware. Once that awareness happens, then there's got to be some hunger to get informed. Wow, I didn't know that? I need to know more. I gotta figure out more. I gotta educate myself by reading, by talking to others, by watching documentaries. There is a wealth, there's no shortage of information at our fingertips. But that's the next step. It's no good to just stay at awareness. Okay, cool, now I have a sense of it. To really do this thing, we gotta become students of it. And lifelong students of it. So that's the second step as individuals, right? And at this point, you can be asking yourself, where am I on this journey? And it is fine if you say, Mark, I'm not even on this. I don't think I'm aware yet. I don't know what you're talking about. Be aware. Aware of what? Right? That's fine. But I think for Forest Hill to get where it needs to be and continue to go where it's going, we all need to be on some part of this journey and moving on it. And there can't be a single member of the church, of the congregation, the community, who's like, you know what, I am where I am, I'm good right here. Because that's the lowest common denominator that we will all stick to. So how do we all figure out where we are, and how do we all commit to moving? Well, we're informed, transformed. This is the scary part that probably most of us shy away from. We can get aware, we can get educated, but wait, I have to be different? I gotta be a different person than I was before I knew this stuff? But it's taken me decades, in most of our cases, to get who I am today. And that's kind of shaky to me, like I'm holding on to who I am right now, and now you're asking me to be willing to be transformed? Yeah. And again, I'm here with you guys. I'm on this same journey. Once we get transformed, then we can start getting vigilant, right? Every day, every moment, activities, thinking, actions that are going to promote a different kind of community engagement. So I have Shannon to thank, and number one for being here, Shannon. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know it's not easy to be in, out, I left, I'm back. But we love you, and I think I speak for everyone. Come back as much as you want. But when Shannon and I were talking this over, she said, Mark, we know this walk. We as Christians, we know this stuff, right? We know that when you decide to accept Jesus into your heart, you're also deciding, I'm not going to be the same person.
Amen. Amen.
Right? You're not saying, I'm accepting Jesus, but I'm sticking with who I am right now. So we all know this already. This is not like out there if I walked out on the sidewalk and tried to tell someone. We're already doing this. I'm willing to be transformed. That's the big transformation for us as Christians. I would submit that this racial equity quest is another transformation that I would welcome you to join me, join others on. But it's a transformation. It's willing to be different. Is this making anyone think of a Bible verse?
Yes. Be ye transformed by
Boom! Be not conformed to this world, which, as John reminded us, is quite broken. And seems more broken each day, sadly. But be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, mindset, awareness, education, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We know this stuff, right? We're walking that journey. The invitation is, as you are on your Christian journey, and it is a lifelong journey, I don't think anyone would say, yep, I'm good, I'm right where I need to be. So if we understand that in our Christian walk, can we understand that in our racial equity and inclusion walk? Right? We have an advantage over everybody else. Because we're already on a transformation path. All right, something that you want. So that's at the individual level. So what are we doing at a collective level? At a collective level, well, it starts with awareness as well, but this time it's shared awareness. It's no good if each of us is aware in silos and we can't talk to each other about it, or your awareness can't help my awareness, right? That's the beauty of a church faith community. And a common language. The PRISM groups, I haven't mentioned PRISM yet, and do we have some PRISM folks in the room? Oh, yes!
Yeah, they're representing.
They are showing up. Thank you, my PRISM people. Number one, thank you for being here. Thank you for the work you're doing. For those who don't know, PRISM is a cohort of folks who have gone through a special training and growing and learning. They're already well on this path. They're doing this work, and they're kind of pioneers for the rest of us because they're forming some shared language and knowledge, and then there are going to be more cohorts and more sharing and more education. So Forest Hill is already doing this work, right? Your job, if you hadn't heard of PRISM, is to ask someone about it. If you haven't talked to someone who's going through prison, is to talk to them about it. What's the common language that I need to know? What am I missing out on? How do I build my own awareness? All right, so we got that. Then I would suggest that we would have, as a collective, a shared racial equity lens. And again, I'm going to share one with you in a second that could be a building block. So that when you have decisions to make, it could be anything, design of a building, design of a service, music, a volunteer activity, hiring of a co-pastor, that you could look at it through this racial equity lens together. The point of the lens is, what are we not thinking of? What are we not thinking of? What are we missing here? What could we do unintentionally to set ourselves back? So that you would have a shared lens, and you would say, here it is. And as you have new folks joining the church, you could say, here's our lens. What do you think? Do you want to add to it? All right. Then you could begin to take informed action on policy, on practice. What do we need to do differently? What do we need to change in our ways we do things? And then the policies and practices begin to change. And then finally, we have collective vigilance behind them. If ever we were getting a national lesson in the undoing of policies, right? However you feel about it. Some of those policies you may feel like, yeah, those need to be undone. My point is simply, anything you build can be unbuilt. So you can't just build it and be like, yes! You have to then be vigilant. Same thing with whatever we build together in the church. I see some folks taking notes. This will be available to you, so feel free to take notes, but if you, this is going to be available. All right, so lens. I've been talking about this racial equity lens. What is it? Again, once again, I wanted to boil it down so it could just become memorable, easy. There's only 3 parts to it. Structure, perception, and belonging. Structure, perception, and belonging. If you can hold on to those 3 concepts, I think you can pull that up anytime you need it to say, what am I not thinking of? Let me think about this from a structure point of view. Let me think about this from a perception point of view. Let me think about this from a belonging point of view. I'm still working on this, but I think you're going to catch 98% of the things you should have thought about with these 3 things. At least I would throw that out. Happy to have that debated. So what does that mean? Structure means focus on structural causes, right? You might see something immediately and think, why is that person doing that? Why are those people doing that? Why is that group doing that? Why is that neighborhood doing that? The structure says, is there a structural cause behind this? Sure, there may be some personal responsibility, and I think one thing we unfortunately do too much is debate personal responsibility or structural cause. It's both. We can hold both those things in our heads. It's both. And who knows which came first, but it actually doesn't matter anymore. If that kid in school is not trying, and we want to just blame that kid, as opposed to thinking, what happened to his parents and grandparents, that they aren't saying good things about school, and what happened? It actually doesn't matter anymore. It's both. We have to talk to that kid about personal responsibility, and he has to do his homework. But we also have to think about how is the teacher treating him, and on and on and on. You all know the story. So structural causes and solutions. I think we're getting better and better at that as a society. Here's the 2 pieces I don't think we're doing as well. The perception part, a willingness to admit how much of this is in our heads, right? And those of us who now, and I know PRISM is talking about implicit bias, unconscious bias, right? And more research, this shows how quickly we as human beings make judgments about each other. If you haven't taken the Harvard University implicit bias test, you can just hop on, Google it, take it. I failed it. You can't help it as a human being. We are hardwired to make quick, snap decisions about what we see. So we have to focus on the perception side, and then belonging versus othering. We are in, again, a moment in our nation and our society where we are othering. Are you with us? Are you with them? And we do that intentionally and intentionally and unintentionally. So those are the 3 levels. I'm going to go through this for time, but just to show you, there's more when you get the PowerPoint. So there's a bunch of stuff you could think about under structure. There's a bunch of stuff you could think about under perception. And there's a bunch of stuff you could think about under belonging. I want to do a little test drive with you of our lens. Because if you say, well, Mark, you said this is actionable, you said we can use it. Well, let's do an example together. And thank you, Brother Ron. His advice was like, make this concrete. So I know there's probably 10 other things. I know of no bigger decision you all have made at this moment than this co-pastor decision. It's just so massive. I am in such deep admiration of you all for committing to a few things are happening with this decision. One is governance structure and the role of co-pastors, right? We've gone quite a while and it served us pretty well having a single pastor. But a willingness as a community to say we're going to go to a co-pastor model, which is then going to open up space for shared leadership at that level. And then our fervent hope, prayer, commitment that that co-pastor will be a woman of color, if not an African-American woman. Our hope, our prayer. We see what God and the universe will make happen for us. But we've stated it, right? So that's huge, that's massive, that's momentous, and it's beautiful, and it is scary. And you're jumping off, leaping, taking a leap. A leap of faith, but it is a leap. So let's put a racial equity lens on it, see if it helps us at all. So, I was going to do a pop quiz. Can't resist. So our racial equity lens is what, and what? Structure. Yes. And belonging, excellent.
Good.
We are rolling. All right, so let's do the structure thing. Will we establish a racial and gender balance in pastoral leadership? That's a structural question. You all have already answered that as best you can, and now you got a search committee working their tails off to make that happen for us on behalf of all of you. Here's a question that lays ahead. How will the co-pastors share their power? Right? I don't think that's mapped out. I think that there's a sense in our hearts of where we, but how will that actually, right? To be determined. That's a structural question to really think about, because we don't want to have a situation where a year from now we've got this amazing co-pastor, but folks are like, no, it kind of seems like John is still making the calls in that one. Or it's gone way too overboard, right? The co-pastors come in and what happened to John? Right? I guess he was more. I better move on. Let me move on. Let me move on. I said I wasn't going to get myself into trouble. All right. Perceptions. What's going on in our heads around this co-pastor? Will we acknowledge assumptions we have? And will we combat them? Will we say, no, stop. Why am I thinking that? Why am I assuming that? I don't know that. Whether we admit it or not, the fact is that if I say to you, black female pastor, something just popped in your head. You couldn't help it. And for some of you, something awesome and wonderful and like, whoa! And for some of you, it was like, ooh, ooh. And maybe memories of something specific, right? Moments you've maybe heard black female preaching. And something didn't strike you quite right. It's like, whoa, ouch, ooh. That's immediate, that's in our heads, that's not going away. That does not make you a bad person. That makes you a human being. But if we pretend it away, oh, I don't see color.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. No, you do, and you should. And you should ask yourself, when I see color, why do I see that? Why do I think that? And it's a constant, exhausting narrative with yourself. Why did I assume that? Right? Are we willing to do that work? Are we open to evolving our mindset? This is the transformation part. It's rewiring our brains. Letting the stereotypes get slowly disrupted. No, not all black women do X, Y, and Z. And everyone in here knows that. But our primitive brain isn't quite there where our intellectual brain is. All right, I gotta wrap up so we can talk. Belonging, though, this is so important, right? There will be, unfortunately, ways that she may feel othered or questioned into an us versus them. Which us? Who are you with? So who are you with? Are you with us or are you with them? Whatever that us and them might be. Male, female, black, white, newer, older, whatever it is, right? Will we help establish a true sense of belonging to the entire church community and not use this as an us-them? That's a tough one. And I think if you don't have belonging in your lens, then you might miss that one. All right, I gotta wrap. Racial vigilance we can come back to, but there are specific things that this means. Racial equity buddy, I always like to call out Lisa Vehe as one of my lead racial equity buddies, which I really appreciate. If you don't know about the equity work she's doing in Shaker Heights, ask her about it, it's fantastic. So there's a bunch of stuff you can do. And think about your spheres of influence. There's a lot of places you can do this work as well, right? Don't just do it in church, where we know we try to be at our holiest, right? What are you doing at your workplace? What you doing at the PTO? What you doing out at the sports field, right? The more you're thinking about different places where you're trying to do this work, the better. I think I can stop there. Thank you all so much for your attention, and I'm eager to hear your reactions and thoughts.
Well, first, let's give it up.
Comments? Doesn't have to be a question, just what you're sitting with. If this was class, I would have everyone turn to a neighbor and talk to your neighbor, but we don't have a lot of time, so we'll jump right in. All right, the man who provided the Bible verse this morning.
I wish you'd say more about the concept of vigilance, because the vigilance has some associations even in the current context that are negative, like vigilante, as opposed to eternal vigilance is the price of liberty or perhaps of diversity and inclusion. So why did you choose that particular concept, and how do you, I guess, just unpack that a little more for us so we can make it a positive rather than, getting trapped in some of these negatives of the term.
Thank you so much for that. And in fact, it was great that I talked with Ron, because he had the same reaction when he heard the word vigilance. And he said, well, I don't see that everyone's going to necessarily get into activism, right? That's not, and he went to that place. And I frankly had not thought of that side of it, although you're exactly right. There is the vigilante sense. I picked the word, I think of it more in the sense of persistence and consistence, right? Every moment staying with it. But I picked vigilant because I think there needs to be an edge to it. And so your question is really well taken. Like, okay, if there's an edge to it, how do you avoid that becoming a negative, harmful edge versus a growing, positive, constructive edge? Very quickly we get into a space of saying, well, who's to say one person's negative edge is another person's positive, right? So I think part of that is about being in community and us continuing to share, wait a second, let's hold ourselves accountable. This feels like this is actually going into more harmful, negative, destructive territory than constructive. I absolutely mean it as a constructive thing. I don't know that there's any easy objective answer to which is which. I think it's about questioning, but the main point of the word is that you've got to lean into this. There is a level of activism even at a personal layer. This isn't just about, hey, try to do your best, or keep it as much as you can. This is really about, the more this can be on the front of your mind, the more effective it's going to be.
Mark,
yeah,
just real quick
yeah,
interruption.
please.
I mean, vigilance, also the root word is vigil. We know how to keep vigil.
Yeah.
So part of it is just, seeing and staying with it as we would over when we keep vigil over something.
Right. But not so vigilant that then we become so focused in, we're not open to other perspectives, other ways of doing things. We're so protective of one way that we lose sight of another way that can help us grow. So there is a danger there, but there are parts of this that we know how to do and can build upon. There was a hand here, someone came first, yes.
Hi, thank you first of all for your time today. This was really great.
Great.
So I wanted to shout, I wanted to shout out a little bit to the Harvard bias study. So we conscientiously made a decision when we moved here to move to Shaker because it was a diverse, integrated community and to send our kids to public schools, etc., come to this church, etc. So I thought I was an aware person. And then I took this Harvard bias test and I went, oh, maybe not. But I wonder how do people start? I mean, that was an important start for me in terms of a bit of a journey of awareness. But what are some of the other ways that we can really lean into just beginning that step of awareness?
It's a really helpful question, because I think there are many roads in. And because this is a personal journey, it's going to look different for everyone. Like literally, if there are 40, 50 people in the room, 40, 50 ways to do this. Even if I say there's kind of a general path. I would say the place to start is one with a willingness and a curiosity. What's this all about? And then determining for yourself, how best do you learn and grow? If you want to if you're looking for a catalyst to kind of spark you to the next step, what's the best one? For some, it might be taking this test. Like, I'm not a biased person. You're taking like, whoa, okay, something's up. I gotta. For others and for most of us, I would say it's probably a conversation. And so I have this notion, again, I mentioned earlier, of all the stuff up here, I think this one is really key for staying with the journey. find someone in your life who you trust to be honest with and be vulnerable with, and who you think will hold you accountable once you say, I'm going to start working out, I'm going to eat better, who's that person who will hold you to that? Some of us, it might be a spouse. In my case, my spouse has given up on me a long time ago. So when I say, I'm going to do, yeah, sure, so that might not be, right? So you can decide which, but I think for some of us, having that conversation to say, I heard this thing, or I'm thinking this thing, can we just talk? Like, how do you see it? And that could be a spark. For others who might not be in the kind of social direction, might simply be, you know, is there something you could read? Right? And, you know, there's a variety of materials out there that are excellent, that can be provided, that just give you, allow, you know, if individually sitting with something yourself. And then, you know, here we are in a faith institution, we must say, just pray, right? I believe there's a reason we're all here in this moment, and that was meant to be. And so, asking why, right? What was that about? I certainly asked myself, why? What am I supposed to do with this? So that might be also another place to kind of seek guidance and support. But there's many, many paths. Thank you for that question. Yes, Shannon?
I think how to phrase this. I think many people of color feel the burden of always doing this work. And I really appreciate you adding into the lecture that even people of color have work to do with their own, you know, biases and assumptions. And so I'm wondering if you could elaborate on what that looks like, what it can look like, in your opinion, within the Black community.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. One of the slides I could have had up here, and I know the PRISM folks are probably chewing on this one, is the different forms of racism. And so there are these 4 forms. Another thing I would want every one of us to be walking around with is that there are different types. And the one we think of most easily, the kind of old time, old school, would be interpersonal. When we say, I'm not a racist, right? We think of people having racist actions and thoughts toward each other. And we've begun to talk more and more about institutional racism and structural racism, right? Very important layers of this, and there's more to be done there. To me, the most pernicious, the most dangerous, the most damaging form is internalized racism. Because after hundreds of years of racism, Black people and others who've been oppressed and marginalized take that inside and start to believe it. If it's in every image that you see. And so we then develop survival mechanisms, because you don't want to walk around thinking of yourself as a less than person. So it's not something we would immediately admit. And in fact, there are things we might do to show out in the opposite direction. Right? I was thinking recently, we were at Malik's graduation, and once again, at the start of the ceremony, they said, please hold your applause until the end. We want everyone's name to be heard, right? Please hold your applause until the end. And what was the phenotype and culture type of those who could not hold back the exuberance for their kid walking across the stage? And wanted every person in that hall to hear their exuberance in that moment. And we're going to claim it no matter what the superintendent or principal said, right? And there's a lot of complexity. Maybe that's just me, and can't help the kind of sociologist within me start unpacking what's going on here. Because of course, once they do that, then you have other people in the room like, oh, there go the Black people again. There they go again, can't take them anywhere. Right? So to the question, right? Part of that work is, I think it would be helpful to understand why do we need to, what's underneath that? And there may be other ways. I think that moment of exuberance is powerful, but it's a fleeting moment, right? We want to walk with that exuberance every single day. Amen. Every single moment, right? It was interesting with the Black Panther movie. Here's another nice Rorschach test, right? Were you compelled by the Black Panther movie, or not really anything? And what's all the big deal? Why is everyone talking about Wakanda all of a sudden? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is another good thing to ask your racial equity buddy. But one of the things I loved, there was these two guys who were kind of passing each other, and two African American men just passing each other, didn't know each other, passing each other on the street. They just passed by, and normally you'd be like, "Hey, what's up? What's up?" But instead, this time the greeting was, "Black Panther in 2 weeks." Right? So what was that about? Right? That moment of, and another thing I loved, I saw on a post or a tweet or something, a black guy saying, "Is this how white people feel all the time?" And it kind of is how white people feel all the time, right? At one level, not that you're joyful every day, but a feeling like white males, thank you. White males feel that way all the time. All right, now we're getting somewhere. Is it time to go? It's like, time to go. We're getting the hook. That's going to be part 2.
Battery's running low.
Turn off the tape, right? But those moments of experiencing like, wow, it feels that good just to be. Like literally, I mean, Melanie and I, we were just pumped for like a month because this movie was coming. Just excited about life. Just a movie, right? At some level. So, how do we, as black people, ask ourselves what that's about, right? What's actually the self-doubt? In some cases, the self-hate that's been poured into us that we now live and hold and breathe. What's the work that we're doing so that we can have a range of reactions to things and are not kind of driven by that because we can't even name it and deal with it. It's right, not something we want to do, but it's part of the work. And then we're at different places in our journey. So, you know, Malik's going to be going off to college at DePaul. Yay, Malik. Very proud of him. He's going to walk into that dining hall on the first day. He's going to have a choice. Right? There's going to be tables with clusters of black students. And there's going to be some mixed tables. And there's going to be everyone else. And Malik's going to have to decide, where am I going to sit? Right? And what's that about? And what I love about Malik, and I said that at his graduation ceremony, he's one of the bridge builders among us. He's just a natural bridge building person. My guess is he'll sit in different tables and you'll find him in different places, right? But for those people who find themselves only feeling comfortable in that one place and not feeling or one or the other, right? Not going anywhere near the black table or only on the black table. So that's part of the work. It's hard work, it's tough work. I don't know if that went where you thought it might go, but.
It did, that's okay.
Okay. We'll talk after. Plant the seeds. Yes, sir. And John, how are we doing on time?
12:30, 15 minutes?
Okay, everyone good with it?
I
No one seems to be. And by the way, Michael, thank you. I get to thank you earlier for the setup. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. I appreciate your remarks. Well taken. But you know when you talk about this term, racial equity lens, which is a term. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, when you speak of this term, racial equity lens, it's such a profound kind of concept, and it's something that it's pretty big. And I was just thinking, if we were in a forum where there were people of color, another gathering, and we'd say, okay, Mark, did you talk to those folks about racial equity lens? But you know, from our perspective, that may mean like reparations. It may mean that we want them, in addition to, let's be civil and kind of like each other and be cool. But that may mean affirmative action too. And because there's a common ground when we look at the United States today and see the amount of economic inequality, income inequality that confronts all of us. So along this journey of common ground, we can say, hey, let's make sure we like each other and we can do it in a civil manner. But don't avoid, there are some big issues. You think finding it or agreeing to a black co-pastor female is a big deal. Committing to affirmative action and reparations and all the rest of that, oh, wow, that causes a lot of people late at night that are husband and wives or families that are liberals and conservatives and say, hey, I want to do all that, but whoa, that is really changing a whole lot, and I'm not so sure where I stand on that. So it's just my comment.
No, I appreciate that. And all I'll say is a racial equity lens will give questions doesn't give answers, right? The answers could be big, they could be smaller, but at least what I hope it does as a tool is make sure we're asking the questions we should be asking. And starting the dialogue we should be starting. To your point, it's not clear where that ends or how big that goes. And again, I say, take it, give yourself some slack, right? Smaller first, building to bigger, you're already well into the journey. But I think it's a point well taken. It doesn't say where the answers will necessarily be. Yes.
I've got the mic.
You do.
Speak into it. I will.
Really speak into it.
That was intentional. I was just, is it on? It doesn't seem to be on for me.
Okay. Oh, yes, Steve.
I was going to go back to what the question Dick asked about vigilance. And as he was asking the question, what I looked at were the things that you have underneath that are all such positive statements that, for me, as long as I look at what's listed there, it will take me away from the negative connotation of what vigilance or vigilantism would remind me of in a racist world. I think the other thing, and I'm trying to remember which one it is, I know in PRISM one of the things we talk about is making space rather than taking space, which I think is one of the big things when you're talking about a racial equity lens, that if what you're doing all the time is taking space, you're not allowing for others to have a different opinion. And that's one of the most important things. If you're only acting on assumptions, then you are taking space, you're not making space.
Thank you.
John, then we'll give it to the front.
Let's get some other comments going on.
Okay, I want to go back to that cross-racial moment of people applauding when their child graduates. And I just want to say, as a person who is the daughter of people from two very reserved cultures, British and Slovak, that at a time when I had a pretty intensive immersion in African American culture, I came out of that really grateful to have been taught that it's okay to want to cheer for your child, and it's okay to want to be cheered for by your parents. And that I think that's part of one of the positive things that cultural examination can bring to us. And I would rather not suppress the people who want to cheer for their children. I would rather white people learn to cheer for their children.
Two here and then back to
Quinn's
you.
back there. And it's a complicated one, right? Because it's not that white people don't want to chair completely at different levels. Part of it is the sense of breaking the rule.
Yeah.
Once the rule's been set, then we'll all abide by it, and it goes.
Yeah, there's more conversation.
Carmel, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. To the gentleman's point here about the word vigilance and the negative connotation of that, whenever I sit and listen to conversations like this, the two words that come to my mind are confrontation and uncomfortable. Just because it feels, people feel like they have to not force a conversation, but initiate it, or to call someone out, or be open enough to be called out. And it makes people uncomfortable. This whole conversation can make people uncomfortable. So I don't necessarily have a question, but my comment would be that all of that's okay, because confrontation and being uncomfortable can be a good thing. From a Christian standpoint, I think what's important and how people receive it is where they feel like that confrontation and uncomfortableness comes from. And if it comes from a place of love, then it's welcome, even if it may take, if we need a timeout.
Thank you.
Nothing wrong with the timeout. Thank you. Mark, I wanted to comment on the gentleman's statement about reparations. Because I'm sitting with something, I've been sitting with it for a long, long time and trying to put some framework around it. I think many times when we get in this conversation and white folks are wanting to understand black folks and vice versa, I think there is this assumption that black folks are looking for reparations, but I think we can redefine reparations. I think we often think that that's monetary somehow. And when we reflect on the years and years of abuse that black folks have suffered that has caused all this internalized racism, this very negative view of what it is to be black. I think we forget that as we do the work to repair that, to remove those structural and institutional oppressions that continue, that is a form of reparation. I think black people want to be able to be educated, to be able to be successful. And it is these barriers, these blockades that are in their way. When I wrestle with this, I often come to the scripture where the Lord teaches us to teach men to fish. Mm-hmm. And I don't think black people are looking for a fish. And I think that's often a perception when we talk about reparations and things, that we're looking to be given a fish. I think we want to learn to fish and be allowed to fish where we want to fish, as much as wherever we want to fish. So I've been really working through that a lot. And I think if we can realize reparations doesn't mean a dollar sign. It's get out of the way, don't prevent, equity. Allow me the opportunity to do what I can do. If you help me believe it, I need to believe it. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Quentin, I know in the back, and then I'm going to be a harsh timekeeper. We got 6 minutes. Then why should you in the corner?
First, thank you very much, Mark. I think it was informative and a lot of food for all of us here to digest. As I leave, the most important thing, or that which I will take the most out of and will try to implement, is get a racial equity buddy. And I think that all of us can do that. And what is, in my head, most important about that is getting somebody who you are comfortable with, but may not necessarily agree with everything you're saying. And in fact, if you got somebody who's in agreement with everything you're saying, find somebody else. In that regard, I guess over the past 2 months, I've had a couple of good discussions with 2 different people. And I'm going to name them. I'm not going to talk about our discussions, but I'm going to name them because I think this is a journey that all of us, including the church, but individually we should be on. And one of them is my good friend, Hermit, who we've had a couple of wonderful talks and discussions, and I just simply love Hermit. And my other good buddy, Scott Lafferty, I don't know if Scott is here. Yeah, Scott's here. And Scott and I have sat down and had some really good discussions about race, racism, as with Hermit. And I just happen to think that you have to be able to see it from a different perspective. What their views are, what my views are, and hopefully we can then begin to build some sort of commonality. And it may take a whole bunch of working through, because when you talk about that large thing which I'm very much on, structural change, but the truth of the matter is, it's hard for people individually to make structural change. So that notion of getting an equity buddy, I think we should all commit to, because I just think it's a marvelous thing. And once again, thank you very much for the presentation.
So I've just really been thinking about this this piece of belonging, and particularly on that co-pastor structure and all that. And I guess what I'm thinking about is not so much the argue with us, argue with them sort of thing that you sort of mentioned, but really the how welcoming are we, how willing are we sort of to change other things besides just that top structure, almost in sort of a, well, we elected a black president, so we're in a post-racial society.
No.
I do have a real concern around that belonging and what do our services look like and things like that, and are those welcoming to a black female co-pastor?
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
I'll be real quick, I promise.
No, that's all right, darling.
Take your time, darling.
Oh, yeah, don't do that.
Someone to do that.
First of all, I want to say that I grew up in the Ludlow community in Shaker Heights, and we were the model for all types of things that changed racially. And so my attitude about this work is probably different than a lot of others. And one of the things, I was also part of PRISM, and one of the things that I find all the time when I do this work is that people come into those rooms and they want to prove that they're more open than the next guy. And I think that what's most important when you're doing this work is to be able to come in honestly and say where you really are. Otherwise, the work can't advance the same. Like, I don't like when people tell me that they have black friends. I know you have black friends, I have white friends, you know. But having friends doesn't mean that you understand all the things that need to be understood with this. So I agree with Quentin when there's a real impact with having a racial equity buddy. But what I'm challenging you to do is for your buddy not to be in this room, not to be a part of PRISM. Because those folks that are in this room, those folks that have gone through PRISM, they're already partially there. The people that we need to impact, the people that we need to buddy with, are the people that you're not seeing here today. Because if it was up to all of us, we probably wouldn't have to keep having these discussions.
Well said.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Could we take 2 more questions and that's it?
I have one.
Just one quick comment. In my own journey, one of the things that I have found is the difference between knowledge and visceral knowing. Our youngest daughter is a married man who's Nigerian, and as he has recounted the number of times he's been pulled over by the police, and as I've sat in traffic court, never once having to pay a ticket, ultimately. And the rage I began to feel, I moved from something that I was concerned about before, and I realized, I started to understand that there's a visceral knowing that my black brothers and sisters carry all the time, and it results in hypertension, illnesses, and a whole bunch of things that I could never get because it's not just a matter of getting our heads around it. It flows through our bodies, and that's part of the journey right now.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Ellie, and then one more question or comment.
Comments are great.
Comments are good.
I have a question. So thanks for talking with us. I think I'm really proud to be a part of a community that's initiating this dialogue and not afraid to confront this. And I think one of the things you emphasized in the presentation was starting those conversations and having that equity buddy. And I'm wondering if you think it's always appropriate to have those conversations, like in every instance, because I think that's something I struggle with as I try to embody an activist in any way I can, but also, should I bring this up? And do you think that it's always important to confront it no matter what, or if you think there's certain appropriate times, and if so, how to judge that and how to be aware of that?
That's a really great question. So my notion of vigilance would say there's always something to be done. But I also think we have to pick our moments. At our social work school, we're taught to meet folks where they are. I think that's an important principle. But that's not meet folks where they are and just leave them right there, right? How do we move? So I imagine there's lots of scenarios where we don't go all out, right? And given my sense of you, I doubt there'll be any scenarios where you don't do anything at all. But it may be just a question, right? Or it may be just a conversation in the side later to the leader of who is in charge of that. Like, that moment, or maybe a phone call later, do something. Vigilance means we cannot afford to let anything go. But your point is super well taken. If we then just every single time we're going at 100 miles per hour, that's going to end up being counterproductive. So I think part of this is about the nuance of making those choices.
Mark, I want to thank you for giving of your time this morning to worship with us and to lead this. you know, this agitates me deeply. When I use the word agitate, it's like a wash cycle. You know, it's trying to get the dirt out of me by always shaking. And I remember, Doris, your words, we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that really stays with me as something that is, you know, on the journey and on the path. We're in this together. And I'm just so grateful for your leadership. And I can tell by the turnout today that I think I speak for all of us in just saying thank you, God bless you. And I hope that as we continue the journey, I can call you up and go, Mark, what are we doing?
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you. Let's give it up.